Welcome back, warriors. Kwe Tansei Sego. My name is Pam Palmater, and this is my YouTube channel where we focus on educating the resistance and inspiring the next generation of warriors to help us protect our peoples and the planet. Today, we are going to set the record straight about what's happening in Wetsuweten territory. And why should you care? Because from all the videos and pictures coming in from their Yinta, Wetsuweten lands, it looks like another violent RCMP invasion is imminent. So I'm going to tell you the 5 most important things you need to know about this situation and how you can help. So stay tuned. In today's video, I'm going to tell you the 5 most important things you need to know about what's going on in Wetsuweten territory. We know that Coastal GasLink pipeline is using the courts and the RCMP to try to force a pipeline through Wetsuweten territory without their consent, all while the province of BC and federal government stand by and let it happen. But before we jump into the video, you should know that I don't speak for the Wetsuweten people. They have their own spokespeople and their own informational tools to help educate other First Nations and Canadians about what's happening on their territory. I'm doing this video in solidarity with their struggle, in an effort to help educate the public to take action. Take action to support the Wet'suwet'en and take action to put pressure on the federal and provincial governments to stop this. This video is part of my personal action to support the Wet'suwet'en in their struggle to defend their sovereignty, their traditional laws and governing systems, and their lands. Because their struggle is our collective struggle as Native peoples, and we are all lifted up by their actions. On the Gidimt'en Yinta Access and Unistoten websites, they provide an overview of the key dates and events that have all led up to now. In this video, I'll show you some of the resources available on their websites, and I'll post a link to their websites in the description box below so that you can access all of their resources. First of all, who are the Wetsuweten? The Wetsuweten Nation is not a band council, it's not a reserve or a First Nation as defined by the Indian Act. The Wet'suwet'en are a nation of peoples comprised of 5 clans with hereditary leaders whose governance structure is based on traditional laws all over their Yinta, Wet'suwet'en traditional lands. Each clan is responsible for a certain territory within the larger Wet'suwet'en territory. There are also 6 Indian bands or First Nations that were created by the federal government under the Indian Act. Each of these bands have legislative jurisdiction over smaller reserve lands. Coastal GasLink Pipeline is a subsidiary of Trans Mountain Pipeline, and this pipeline is part of the project to transport fracked natural gas to Kitimat. Now, let's look at the timeline. In 1997, the Supreme Court of Canada released its decision in the Delgamuukw case, confirming that Aboriginal title to traditional lands exists in Canada as part of the common law, and it's also a protected right under Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982. In that case, both the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en nations were represented by their hereditary leaders as plaintiffs, not chiefs and councillors under the Indian Act. About a decade later, in 2007, the Wet'suwet'en expressed their view that they did not want pipelines in their territories. The 2 clans that you've likely heard about in the media are the Unistoten and the Gidimt'en. They are 2 of the 5 Wet'suwet'en clans that have set up access points in their respective clan territories. In 2009, a checkpoint was established at the entrance to the Unistoten territory. The following year, cabins were built within the proposed pipeline territory, and in 2015, a healing center was built. In 2015 as well, the hereditary chiefs from all 5 clans declared their support for the Unistoten and said no to all pipelines in Wet'suwet'en territory. In December of 2018, the Unistoten camp was served with an interim injunction ordering the removal of any obstruction that would interfere with Coastal GasLink pipeline project. However, in 2018, the Gidimt'en also set up their access point in solidarity with the Unistoten to counter the claims by Coastal GasLink pipeline lawyers that the Unistoten were just a bunch of rogue protesters. Nothing could be further from the truth. Then, on January 7th, 2019, also known as the Day of Shame, the RCMP tactical unit assaulted the Gidimt'en by dismantling their camp and arresting 14 people, including an elder. The camps have continued, and they remain determined to defend their lands from the pipeline. The RCMP have continued to dig in and increase their numbers and their weapons on Wet'suweten territory with no permission, and have continued their harassment of Wet'suweten peoples despite the public proclamation of a 7-day stand down to facilitate talks. I spoke with Gidimt'en Yenta Access spokesperson Molly Wickham on my Warrior Life podcast, who told us that with the increased RCMP surveillance and harassment and recent arrests, they believe that another violent RCMP invasion is imminent. The Wetsuweten Nation has real cause to worry, given the revelation by the Guardian news outlet that the RCMP has a document permitting lethal overwatch of the Wet'suweten as part of their strategy, as well as their instructions for their officers to use as much violence as they want to sterilize the site. While the RCMP initially tried to deny that lethal overwatch means lethal force, which would be a common sense interpretation, it was later confirmed by an RCMP memo that lethal overwatch does indeed mean the use of lethal force by an RCMP officer. Lethal force, that means deadly force. This should come as no surprise, given that the RCMP used snipers with high-caliber weapons during the last raid. Coupled with this deadly revelation, we have also seen the usual RCMP misinformation campaign in the media, denying the use of flyovers, then admitting it, saying they'll respect the 7-day stand down, and then harassing Wet'suweten members anyway. We have also seen uninformed political commentary by some in the media who don't know either Wet'suweten law or Canadian law, which only serves to make the matters worse and confuse Canadians. So here are the 5 most important legal clarifications that you need to know about what's happening in Wet'suweten territory. Number 1, Wet'suweten laws and governing systems have never been extinguished. They are still a sovereign nation with their traditional forms of government intact. And it doesn't matter if you don't agree with their system, if you don't like their system, if you would choose a different system. This is the law on Wet'suweten territory, and it's backed up by Section 35 of Canada's Constitution, as well as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and numerous other international laws. Number 2. It is the Wet'suweten Nation that has first title to all of their traditional lands, not the province of British Columbia or the government of Canada, and certainly not Trans Mountain. The Wet'suweten have their own laws about how to use, manage, and protect their lands within their clan system. Canadian law also provides that Aboriginal title is the exclusive use and benefit of the Indigenous group. They have said no to pipelines, and that is the law. That's the end of it. The hereditary system of governance in the Wet'suweten Nation has been in place since time immemorial and well known to all the parties, government, courts, RCMP, and industry. The hereditary leaders have been working alongside their band councils for decades. And when the Gitxsan and Wet'suweten Nations went to court to argue their land title claims, it was not the Indian Act chiefs and councils that were represented, it was the hereditary leaders. The Delgamuukw case went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada with the hereditary leaders as the claimants of title. There didn't appear to be an issue until Coastal GasLink Pipeline wanted to force their pipeline through Wet'suweten territory, and now everyone is saying, oh, we don't know who to talk to. Number 4, there can be no pipeline on Wet'suweten territory without their free, prior, and informed consent according to their own laws and governing systems. And it doesn't matter if Indian Act chiefs and councils signed impact benefit agreements. That doesn't change the fact that there was no Wet'suweten Nation consent for Coastal Link Gas Pipeline on their traditional territory. And finally, number 5. Whether it is Wet'suweten law or Canadian law, the Wet'suweten Nation has no choice but to live, assert, and defend their sovereignty, their laws, and their lands if they want to keep it. That's how it works. Read any Supreme Court of Canada Aboriginal title case. How do they identify title lands? Well, the first question is, were these lands used to the exclusion of others? And that's exactly what they are doing. They are maintaining access points to assert their control over their territory to the exclusion of others. That is the definition of Aboriginal title. That's the law. That's what's protected in Wet'suwet'en law and Canadian law and Canada's own constitution. The RCMP are clearly acting outside of the law. They are acting as private security for Trans Mountain, who have no land rights and no constitutional rights to the territory. In law, there is simply no contest of rights here. Wet'suwet'en have constitutionally protected laws and industry have none. There is no confusion here, and there's certainly no complexity. The Wet'suwet'en have the right to say no. All parties have to get their head around that and respect that right to say no. The next step is not to bully and harass them into giving up. It's simply to respect their decision, and they can reroute their pipelines somewhere else, if at all. None of the misinformation, RCMP lies, or uninformed commentary have turned the public against the Wet'suwet'en. In fact, it has had the opposite effect. It has inspired a groundswell of support. First Nations and Canadian allies all across Turtle Island have declared public support for the Wetsuweten Nation and have called on the RCMP to stand down and leave Wet'suwet'en territory. There have been numerous marches, rallies, and protests nationwide, and we plan to continue these and other actions to show Canada that we are united against these unlawful actions against our Wet'suwet'en brothers and sisters. Many First Nations support the Wet'suwet'en, including the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and the Gitxsan Hereditary Chiefs. Canadians have offered their support as well. The Council of Canadians have called on Canadians to support the Wet'suwet'en. Thousands of high school students and university students have left their classes and marched in support of them as well. More recently, the BC Human Rights Commissioner has called on Canada to stop the eviction of Wet'suwet'en peoples, prohibit the use of lethal weapons by the RCMP, and they also want to guarantee that no force will be used against the Wet'suwet'en. Commissioner Govender emphasized that Wet'suwet'en peoples have been peaceful in their opposition to the pipelines on their land and should never be faced with violence by the Canadian state. Amnesty International also reminded governments that the Wet'suwet'en have a right, a very clear right to free, prior and informed consent on any project that may impact their rights. Amnesty also called on Canada to fully comply with the United Nations Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination's recommendations that 1. Canada freeze any present and future approvals of large-scale projects until free, prior and informed consent is obtained. Number 2, to cease forced evictions from traditional lands. Number 3, to guarantee that no force will be used. And number 4, to withdraw all policing and security forces from Native territories. I think that every First Nation person and Canadian should pressure the government to comply with those United Nations recommendations. I hope you all make the time to check out the Unistoten and Gidimt'en to Access websites and use the supporter toolkits to find ways that you can help. Thank you all for watching this channel. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing, commenting, and sharing these videos with your family, friends, colleagues, and social justice allies. It is incredibly important that we all stand united to support the Wet'suwet'en because they stand for our rights and the rights of our future children as well. Till next time, stay alert, warriors.